Words Don't Do It Justice, the last Monday of every month at 2:30. Words Don't Do It Justice, brought to you by 314 Publishing and Imperial Dreams Productions. Yes, folks, it is that time again. We are, well, we're not live, but you get what I mean. This month's podcast, extra special podcast, got a big major announcement at the end of it. And, oh yeah, I'm back. You're back with the Ruthless Wonder, not a Ruthless Wonder. And I can't do these podcasts alone, so of course I brought some friends along. First up, can we call her the nicer version of me when it comes to the blog? I think we can. She definitely does the hard-hitting topics that I sometimes don't get a chance to even think about doing. You love her. You've already heard her once on this podcast. Rain. Say hi, Rain.
Hi, everybody.
And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you the newest member of Words Don't Do It Justice. They say this man can leap tall buildings in single bound. They say he's faster than a locomotive. At home we call him Superman, but to you he'll be known forever forward as the Radical Ref. Say hi.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
So, this week on the podcast, this month on the podcast, we've got 3 topics for you instead of our usual 2. We've got, like I said, that big announcement coming at the very end, which you'll definitely want to stick around and hear more about. But give us, just a minute, and we'll be right in with the first topic. And it's a subject that I'm sure everyone at some level can understand, and it's about the rising cost of college. So, we'll be back here in just a minute. At Words Don't Do It Justice.
Hey guys, what's up? This is DJ Horace of Wise Guy Jukebox, also known as the Almighty Bird Chest, or the Chili Eagle with the headphones. If you're interested in listening, talking, or discussing all things music involving an assortment of topics, check out the show. Won't hurt till you try it. Also check out my album reviews at wiseguyjukebox.wordpress.com, or like my Facebook page for weekly jams at facebook.com/wiseguyjukebox. Other than that, stay slick. I'll catch you guys later.
What is good? It's your friendly neighborhood nerd, the Bobo, and if you're looking for a place to kind of kick up your feet and get a little news, some reviews, talk with some interesting people, and a whole lot of laughs, then come kick it with me and my crew, here on Bobo's Block. We do it for the nerds, freaks, and geeks alike. Heck, even for the geeks in training. So, let's have a block party, people. Bobo's Block, only on Otacast Radio Network.
And of course, you guys just heard the ads courtesy of our favorite other podcasts, and of course, the new theme music we brought in. Shout out to my cousin Smooth Fusion for that track, Triumph. Gotta love that. But I said we're going to talk about 3 subjects today. Let's get right into the first one. Let's talk about the rising cost of college. Now, one of the things that popped up, oddly enough, today as I was really just happening to be on Facebook, and I'm sure some other folks possibly have seen it. It's currently more debt in the student loan crisis between all students that have gone to college than we ever had as a national debt coming into the 1900s. So we are doing wars level of debt for just students going to school. And the question becomes, why is that? Why is it that we've put such a barrier to getting rid of college debt? As most folks will know to some degree, there was a point where you could actually declare bankruptcy and have education debt for college loans wiped away as part of the bankruptcy process. And over time, those laws have changed to the point where, for a fairly sizable amount of time, you have not been able to do that. But even further, the steps that have been taken to help with student debt have not been, other than consolidating the servicers, have not always been pro-student. I'm sure some of the older students, older folks that are listening, as well as older students, can remember that it used to be you got all private loans after maybe $2,000 or $3,000 in loans from your school, and paying back those private loans is far more expensive than any of the federal loans. And especially when you get into things like professional schools, postgraduate work, postdoctoral work, master's degrees and things of that nature. So I wanted to kind of talk about the rising cost of college and get, of course, everyone's perspective on what they, not necessarily what you think can be done just yet. Well, I'm sure we'll get to that in just a minute, but just why you think it is so disproportionate to the average American's ability to pay for college. And of course, we try to stay in somewhat of an order. So we're going to start with Rain on this topic.
Well, I think to really make it as simple as possible, it's because we went from making school about getting an education to the schools being about making a buck or several thousand of them. Once any organization goes from changing its priority to making money over whatever service that they're supposed to be providing, that's when everything, goes to hell, basically. The same thing happens with the insurance companies. The same thing happens with health costs and health care and medication. As soon as they realize that Americans, Americans, because there's so many other nations where education is completely free, as soon as the American business person realizes that they can actually capitalize and make several thousand off of people who are just trying to get themselves ahead, that's when everything goes wrong. So the disproportion is all about them being able to continue making money off of us.
Now I want to stay with you for a minute on this, Rain, because you did what I actually thoroughly enjoyed as an article of about colleges and sort of how we approach college. And that infographic you put up at the time, I thought was really telling. Sort of the way other countries, English-speaking countries, handle school debt. When you were looking at that and you were dealing with those was there other than this sort of notion that student debt shouldn't be something that hinders you, was there any sort of overarching sort of feeling behind the laws that you happen to run across and in preparing that information, or did you feel like other countries seem to view education debt as something that was okay to let go at a time?
Well, really, what I saw in my research is basically that other nations still consider education to be something that is necessary for a younger generation to be able to be productive citizens. They recognize these other nations, like, if I remember correctly, I think Ireland is one of them, for example. They recognize that a person, an individual, a growing person, or any kind of someone who decides that they actually want to take that step of so-called higher education, they recognize that it's a necessary step and that they shouldn't have to worry about the money of it when it comes down to it, because if you don't want your nation to suffer the brain drain issue, I don't remember how long ago it said, but India used to have that problem a lot, where they would be educating their youngsters and then they would leave. So they actually had to implement several incentives to make it so that they wouldn't leave. So because what would happen is they would leave, let's say India or China or Japan or whatever, with their degree and come here to the U.S., which it's funny because there are so many statistics out there that actually show so many very well and properly educated doctors driving cabs here, which is hilarious because they left their country where they could have done what it is that they actually went to school for and couldn't get into the market. But that's neither here nor there. So yeah, they recognize these issues. They don't want to lose their educated youths or their educated elders or whoever to the so-called land of opportunity. They put incentives in place to make sure that they can keep their people and make sure that their nations get to grow. And since doing that, that's what has caused the, I'm going to say, diminished returns of the United States education system, because while other countries are, taking those steps to make it attractive to get educated, the United States is doing everything in the opposite. It's, we promote ignorance and we promote underachieving. We promote all of these things as things that are okay and right, because not everybody can go to college. Well, you're absolutely right. The reason why not everybody can go to college is because you guys are pricing us out of the market. And more importantly, once you've priced us out of the market, you've also made it all so impossible for, let's say, someone who has an undergraduate degree to actually be able to make enough money to be able to pay off the loans. So then they have to go and get another degree that's going to cost that much more. So instead of just being maybe $20,000 or $30,000 in debt, they're now $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in debt, and that's just on tuition costs. Let's not talk about the cost of books and the cost of living, trying to do part-time work or full-time work while you're being a student, and actually having to try to do things like study and actually pass classes. It's a really disgusting thing what the United States higher education system has done to us, and it's high time we actually start calling them on it.
That's certainly exactly the kind of point I wanted to get out of you on the subject, because it does seem like we have a sort of intellectual vacuum going, where the few intellectuals that do exist, we try to remove them from whatever it is that they're experts in. And this kind of leads me to what I want to bring in the ref for. Like myself, you've done the law school bit. You've done it at a higher tier law school than I have. And coming out of that environment, I guess the question to put to you is, for what it cost to be educated at the law school you went to, and comparing that to the value out of your education in undergrad, do you feel like the current way we handle the costs for both of those levels of education are, I won't say proper, do you feel like you're getting the actual value, not just the name? I know to a certain degree, the better the school, the bigger the name, the more expensive it's going to be, but do you feel as though you actually got value out of your education exceedingly above schools that weren't necessarily as expensive? And along with that, like I said, at each level, do you feel that you were paying for essentially what the education that you got was worth?
That's a really great way to think about it, and I think that's actually kind of directly back to Rain's thought process in the fact that it's not the way that the United States tends to think about it. Are you getting your money's worth? For me, when you take in my total debt doing an undergraduate of 4 years, a law school of 3 years at a top 100 law school that was out of state, my expenses are close to probably $250,000. It is very easy for me to tell anybody that nothing that I got in my 7 years of higher education was worth that much money. It wasn't even close. There was a very perceived improvement in my education, but that was going from my undergrad, my basic undergrad, to law school. That was supposed to be an improvement in education. I was going from the general 4-year degree to a specialized professional, graduate level work. And so there should be a change in the expectations of the education and what that education provides. However, I can easily sit here and say that, nothing I did in school and nothing school gave me specifically was worth the debt that has heaped upon not just myself but my family. In order to get myself through school, my entire family has had to make sacrifices. And I think if we're not careful, we're going to see these costs start to get families back to the point where all of a sudden you're going to have people born 3-4 generations from now who are going to go to college and say, I'm the first person to go to college in my family again. Because people aren't going anymore because, to be quite frank, I have friends who have done maybe 2 years of undergrad, just basic college level degree work, and they're working and making just as much, if not more, than myself. Because they've been in the working fields, actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, getting hands-on experience, which is something that you don't get in college. You get what at least in law school they call doctrinal issues. And so you don't actually get the hands-on personal experience of working in the field that you want to work in. You don't get the actual value of understanding how that field operates until long after you're out of school. And so, then an individual like myself who went to law school finds himself out of law school and looking at people who say they want to go to law school and trying to warn them off of it because it's not what everybody wants to think it is.
And that's pretty fair. Rain was wanting to bring up a point real quick. I just wanted you to kind of go ahead and go with it.
Well, it's funny because I have the very same experience as someone who I do have 2 degrees, and I have, done a lot of stuff. And when you are trying to apply for jobs, and this is any field, it no longer matters that you actually have a degree in the field. I mean, yeah, I guess it helps, but you get the degree, but they're still like, so how much work in the field have you done? None. I was busy studying it. And I think it's a psychologically poisoning thing, because it's like, so you sent me this, you promised me this bill of goods, and now you're basically saying, ha ha, fooled ya. And it's really, it's very sad. I just wanted to say that. So here to your making that point.
One of the things that that I can totally agree with in that is that there, this idea of the return on investment, that like for the money and time you put into undergrad and definitely into law school, it takes significantly more time to get to the place in the career that you are basically told that you're going to be in the moment you have these degrees. And the ref and I have had a discussion more than once on this idea of, is law school set up in the right fashion? But I think it actually expands out to undergrads as well. And I'll explain what I mean. law school and undergrad, you spend a given amount of time, usually 4 years for undergrad in most folks' cases, and 3 years for law school. You spend that time taking only courses and possibly doing internships in your free time or over the summer. When you're done and you go to apply for jobs in the field, you're expected to be able to handle things that are already customary within that field because you've studied so long in that particular field and profession. But the reality is that a lot of, and especially with law school and medical school you have to do residency after you get done with med school anyway. But with law school, you are expected to learn essentially on the job no matter what position you go into with whatever type of law you do. You're expected to learn, and maybe 3 to 4 years down the line, you really have that full amount of understanding of how the field works that you're working in, and you've made your way up into a position where you actually are doing something more in line with what you planned on or necessarily what you're good at. So my alternative, and I want to get each of your opinions on this, and we'll go in reverse order, so we'll have the Radical Rev first, and then we'll have Rain. My thought process on this, and what I want to put to you is, what if instead of, for that last year of law school, and for that last year, maybe year and a half of undergrad, you aren't taking classes at all? That the entire time is a apprenticeship with the field that you're in. So if you're going to undergrad for a history degree so that you can teach, you've gotten the history degree so that you can teach classes at the college level. You're apprenticing with a college professor in the same way that a grad assistant would, but you're doing it before you get the degree. If you're an engineer, you're apprenticing with an engineer to learn whatever it is that you're going into engineering-wise. That we take a much more, and Chris will know this, the ends of court style approach to these types of education, and especially when it comes to law school, that instead of the third year of law school being the time where you have a bunch of classes that are just electives so you can get out of there, and take your bar prep courses and figure out what state you're going to take the bar in, you spend that time in a lawyer's office, doesn't matter how big or small they are, but you spend time actually learning from them. Historically speaking, before law schools became commonplace, that's how you became an attorney. You spent time apprenticing, and many times it was, as many as 5 years in some cases. You would spend that time apprenticing with an attorney, and then you would take the bar exam so that you could also be an attorney. But you spent that time learning how everything worked from someone already in the field, instead of just learning it from a class. One of the things I always talk about is I hate secondhand knowledge. Give me the book and let me learn it from the book. I don't want to necessarily hear your lecture. So what if we took that apprenticeship hybrid with traditional education approach to undergrad, grad school, doctoral work of either kind, be it PhDs or JDs or MDs? What if we took that more apprenticeship hybrid approach? And we'll start with the ref first.
Well, Ruthless, you are wonderful and a man after my own heart, because obviously this is a conversation we've had before, and it's something I strongly agree with. Practical skills is something that is greatly lacking in anybody that gets any form of higher education. Maybe you're capable of writing a paper. Sure, maybe you know how to cite a source either in Chicago style or APA format. But when it comes to doing a job, when it comes to handling filing, paperwork, the simple social workings of an office, you might be completely unprepared. Because you might have been a bookworm in school and stayed in the library the whole time and never talked to a soul. And you've gotten straight A's. But then when it comes time to be in the office and shake hands, you're awkward as a duck. You just don't know what to do. So I 100% agree that the idea of practical apprenticeships is a thing that is of the past that I wish we could bring back. Many of our founding fathers, the individuals that we call the founding fathers, individuals like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, were attorneys, but many of them learned the very way that Ruthless just described. The idea of learning underneath someone, kind of being taken under somebody's wing. And it kind of brings me to one of my favorite sayings when I think of education. And I use this saying for many different things, but I think it also applies to education. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a group to give you the proper knowledge. Getting knowledge from any one specific source will never give you complete knowledge. Getting knowledge from multiple facets and multiple areas and multiple perspectives will absolutely broaden what you know and what you can then turn around and apply. The problem I see, and just to play devil's advocate for a brief period of time, because what good WDDIJ podcast would be complete without that?
Of course.
The problem is the communities, and the fact that, one, you have to get a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, of all different parts of the community, of all different job levels, of all different income levels, to agree to take people under their wing and do these apprenticeships, and to allow people to come in that they don't know, that are, the only way they know that this person is qualified is that they've been in school for a little while, and teach them some of the basics of how to do a job. The reverse of that also is the colleges letting that happen, because, of course, if you're out and you're away learning real things, well, guess what? You don't need to buy that professor's newest edition of his book. And you don't need to go and buy that book at the university bookstore that has a huge markup on that book, so that they're making a good 200% on it. So it kind of goes all the way back to the original points Rain was talking about, and it's that almighty dollar. It's the reason we all were told that we should go to school and get an education, and it's also going to be the reason that prevents us from getting a complete education. We get taught words, we get taught phrases in law school, we get taught cases and precedent. You don't get taught, hey, how do you handle a filing system, or how do you deal with intake for a client? How do you deal with just meeting a client and setting up a meeting and fitting your schedule to theirs? How do you deal with the interview process of a very, very serious topic, such as child molestation? If you've got a client that comes in and they're trying to get a divorce and there's an issue of child molestation within the relationship, how does a topic like that, that's so sensitive and so horrifying to so many people, get dealt with in an office in a proper and professional manner? Most people in my profession, when they get out of school, are completely deers in the headlights to those sorts of things. They have no idea about what to do or how to act or what to say. Now, I was lucky enough that where I went to law school, they had law clinics, and those clinics had varying levels of interaction with the law there in the city that I went to school. And so we would actually get student attorney licenses, and I would be able to go with a licensed attorney next to me and actually practice in court, giving opening statements, doing cross-examinations, presenting evidence, meeting judges and clerks and officers of the court, and actually doing real attorney's work. And that was the most valuable experience that I got. And it was something that they made me wait until my last year of school to do. It is not something that is required. It is a choice. It's an option. And it was the best option I ever took advantage of, because so many of my classmates have called me since school and asked me about these things, because they never had experience with them, while I was busy dealing with 20 or 30 cases in a school year and having to multitask, handling all of those different files, all of the very similar fact patterns, remembering client names, just very basic principles of professionalism that you learn in an office that you don't learn in a classroom. And like I said, I fear that as brilliant an idea and as correct an idea as I think it is, that almighty dollar and the nervous attitude from a community perspective of actually letting kids that they don't know into their businesses and into their homes and into their work fields, as well as the almighty dollar that the colleges might lose from maybe just one more year of getting these kids to buy their professor's books at the bookstore, is going to be a hurdle that I'm not sure that the U.S. is ever going to be able to overcome.
I'm just going to chime in on this real quick because
Yeah, Ray, go ahead.
in so much agreement right now. And I wanted to also add to that, not just necessarily the loss of the almighty dollar, but I mean just the threat of someone else coming in and taking your spotlight. You know, where the teacher surpasses the apprentice. It used to be, which is why it is that it was, from my understanding of the history of it, the reason why so many started shying away from apprenticeships in the first place is because it was often that the apprentice would outshine the teacher would then sabotage the student's success. Or worse, many students actually died back then because, you know, that kind of thing was okay. Well, not necessarily okay, but it was a lot easier for people to get away with back then. And that kind of thing still goes on today, even in offices where, you know, random corporate head has a personal assistant or something who knows the ins and outs of the business because they've done so much for them. And so now they feel this extra threat of their assistant, or in this case apprentice, being able to outshine them, being able to outdo them, being more skilled than they are, because, you know, they've basically been using this person to do all of the stuff that they don't like to do. So they've actually gotten even better than them at doing these extra things. And the backlash ends up being, you know, this person can get blacklisted when they try to leave the company, or the person, meaning the student, is basically torn down. Like, oh, well, you know, you're great, but you'll never be good enough too. And that kind of psychology that often gets played with people in those positions, it is detrimental to the economic growth of entire generations, because the people who are already in that position aren't willing to give up the spot. So it is a big deal, and it should be done that way. We should be able to go and learn from each other, learn from someone who has more experience, and they should be willing to step down. Unfortunately, things are not the way they should be.
And if I may, I would love to chime right back in on this.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Gosh, Rain, I feel bad. We're not giving people enough of an argument, but I couldn't agree more. In fact, have personal story directly related to the idea of individuals who are experienced and sort of will take an individual under their wing, however, will still kind of sabotage that individual. And that happened to me fairly recently, in a sense, with an individual that was a practicing attorney, and they, for lack of a better phrase, threw me under a bus by giving me a case and telling the clients one thing, telling me another thing, and then letting me figure out the issue. And so then when I kind of fell on my face and had to bite a bullet and tell the client, you know what, I'm not going to charge you for the services because that's what I think the right thing to do would be because I felt that you'd been misinformed, really that individual just kind of laughed and said, well, now you've learned the hard way. Ha ha ha. And so it's really this terrible. It's a great thing and a bad thing all at the same time. In the United States, we have this great sense of independence. You know, everybody can go open up their own business, open up their own shop, do what it is that they think they're good at, and make a living out of it. But once they're in that position, they'll be damned if anybody is ever going to come along and do it better. And the first person that does, they're going to try and stomp on and keep them from doing any better. And so I 100% couldn't agree with you more that it is absolutely a common trend that once somebody gets to be king of the hill, they don't like to let it go. And the way it worked in the past so often was people looked for the person to kind of take their throne over, to take over the thing they had created. You know, your work was almost like family, and that you wanted somebody to carry on the family name, you wanted somebody to carry on the business name. And it doesn't work that way anymore, and it's very sad to see. And if it did, you know, the few people that I do know that are lucky enough to have very great mentors that really help protect them and groom them to get ready for what's ahead, those individuals are very lucky and very few, unfortunately.
Well, now, you know, guys, I'm going to unfortunately have to introduce the shameless plug in this moment. If you if you're one of our regular readers of Words Don't Do It Justice, you already know about the Feed Your Mind initiative. And one of the 48 laws of power is never outshine the master. But that's kind of the idea here. That's why I say it should be some sort of hybrid. Should be universities working with local businesses in whatever fashion. The school wants money. The school wants money however you can get it. So maybe the student pays to be a part of the apprenticeship program the same way they pay for their tuition. Maybe the business is assigned to the students based on need. Whatever it is. Maybe you can get your own outside person if you already have a family member or friend of the family or some kind of connection to get you the type of apprenticeship that you want ahead of time. Maybe that's the way you approach that kind of a thing, so that there's less of that concern about who you're learning from and what you're learning from them. But I think we can all agree, and this is eerily the most happy-go-lucky moment of podcast history for us. But I think we can all agree that there needs to be some kind of change to the way we approach preparing students for the real world and once they get their education.
Yes.
So I want to leave that sort of there, not fully put a pin in it, but I want to take a quick pause here. We're going to do a little quick, I almost called it station identification. Wow, it's been a while since I had to say those words. But I want to take a quick pause here for a break. We're going to come back in, kind of finish up this discussion, and go right into our next topic, which is my mother's favorite doctor, Dr. Oz, and some of the issues surrounding why he was in front of Congress here recently. So we'll be right back, folks. Like I said, quick break, nothing too long. And you are listening to the Words Don't Do It Justice podcast. I am the Ruthless Wonder, and we'll be back.
Why, hello, Jimmy. Why the long face?
Well, Mr. Johnny Balsa, sir, I'm a little sad because I need more radio drama in my life.
Huh? That's so. Let me ask you something, Jimbo. Do you like starships?
Well, yeah, they're cool.
What about space mercenaries?
Oh, yeah, I love those guys.
Do you love space battles in galactic space?
Oh my god, yes, I love it!
Do you like blasting off into space, Jimmy?
Oh my god, yes! Yes, please, I want to blast off! Yeah.
Jimmy, are you ready to join Team Star Fox in space?
Oh my goodness, Mr. Balsley, yes! I want to join the Star Fox team and blast off into galactic war space!
Then tune in to Project Zion's G Diffuser 01.
Brought to you by WDDIJcast Radio.
What's going on, everybody? It's your girl Saki. I'm chilling with my sisters Tenchi and Mako, and we're here to give you the 411 on our new show, Nexus Gen Radio.
That's right. After Dark Radio is now the new and improved Nexus Gen Radio. We're still bringing you the hottest topics, theme news stories, smooth poetry, and latest news.
So do us a favor and catch us on Facebook.com/Nexus Gen Radio. We'll see you guys there.
Folks, we are back. Now, I do want to say real quick, we're going to wrap up this education topic, and please stay tuned. There is a massive announcement at the end of this podcast. So stay tuned literally to the last time you hear my voice and the theme music plays us out to the end. There is a massive announcement at the end there. You're going to like it, and I know a bunch of people that are like surprised it's coming. So be surprised and be happy. But we wanted to get really quick on this topic education. I'm going to give Rain and the Radical Ref one last moment to just give sort of a final thought section on this. Not nearly as long as we normally do on the Wrath of Ruthless, but just a like sort of a cherry on top of the sundae there. And I'll start with Rain since we started with her at the beginning of the topic.
I have personal experiences with this whole thing, so I'm particularly sensitive about the issues. Sorry, give me a second. When it comes down to the grand scheme of things, you can choose to listen to the biggest mouth, or you can choose to listen to someone who actually knows something. And a lot of times people tend to listen to the biggest mouth. And it's disgusting. There. That's my piece on that at this point.
As the resident biggest mouth from time to time, I understand. Sometimes you shouldn't listen to the Ruthless Wonder. But definitely not when he's podcasting. Remember.
Let's listen.
Words don't do it justice. Anyway, let's go ahead and get a last word from the Radical Ref.
Well, as the Radical Ref, first off, I think this conversation has highlighted the fact that we would like to give a straight red card to the higher education system in the United States.
Yes.
Send it off. It's gone. It's done. It is not what it's cracked up to be.
Boom! Straight red. Martin Tyler and Andy Gray are losing their minds.
The fact that the sports programs tend to be a bigger focus at many of these major quote-unquote universities than do the higher education things. Ultimately, there's a lot of problems. We've highlighted some of those problems. All the people in this podcast suffer from the things that we're talking about: the debt, the weight of the debt, the way you get into the debt, what you're promised for the debt, and then what you don't get as a result of the debt. And ultimately, you know what? Words just don't do it justice.
Amen. Amen.
You see that, folks? His first ever appearance as the Radical Ref, and he is already quoting the catchphrase.
And
Go on, people.
Got it right. Look at that. Look at
You
that.
cannot buy this kind of awesomeness. Now, let's get on to what is surely to be a very fun topic for everyone, but definitely for the two people I have with me. That laugh lets you know where we're going with this. Here recently, Dr. Oz was brought before Congress to talk about his endorsement of several different, look, I'm just going to call it what they are. They're unregulated supplements. The supplements and vitamin industry has been as close to no regulation as you could possibly be without actually being the Wild West and having snake oil salesmen traveling the country selling what cures for lumbago. Look, I have no problem with people who believe that taking a vitamin supplement to aid in their workout, to aid in their weight loss, is a great thing. What I have a problem with is a man who says he's a doctor going on national television every day at 4 o'clock and telling us all that Green Mountain coffee bean extract can suddenly make you lose every pound you've ever put on in the history of ever. Now, before I get into a truly ruthless tirade about the subject, I want to turn this back into the discussion it needs to be. And I want to start with this idea of the influence of celebrity doctors on health. Now, I don't just mean dietary stuff, because obviously every doctor recommends that you stay in a healthy weight. What I mean is the influence of celebrity doctors on the way we deal with health. For instance, I'm not going to say his name because I don't want this man ever having another person Google him. But there is a doctor who claims that he can cure cancer and AIDS with a tropical fruit diet. Now, he's not had any peer-reviewed studies to prove this. He's not actually produced any patients that clearly had AIDS or cancer and clearly are entirely free of either of these diseases. But according to him, and people that quote him on Facebook and repost this stupid blog post from the 90s where he made these claims, according to them, he can cure these diseases, and we just don't want to listen to him, and we just don't believe in him because we're attached to Western medicine. Whatever you feel about Eastern and Western medicine is not the point of issue here. What I'm saying is this influence of celebrity doctors who are more famous than they are, to the point where you know their names, on the way we look at health. Because Dr. Oz is only Dr. Oz. There have been doctors of all kinds of parts of medicine. I'm not just talking about celebrity dietary doctors. I'm not talking about celebrity surgeons. I'm not talking about plastic surgeons. I'm not talking about necessarily psychiatrists and psychologists. We're talking about just doctors in general and the effect of their celebrity, sort of them becoming bigger than what they're trying to convey as the message. And do you think that sort of direction that we've gone with shows like The Doctors being on TV, as well as Dr. Oz, do you think that going that direction has made health a more murky prospect in America? Obviously, we can't deal with it internationally, but do you think that that's made health more murky in the U.S.? And we're going to start with the man that gave a straight red card to the American educational system, the Radical Ref.
Yes, and you know what? I am now going to call a personal foul, roughing the consumer on the medical systems currently in the United States. Because, let me tell you what, celebrity doctors are dangerous as hell. And I am not just referencing Dr. Oz. I'm not just referencing the individuals on the doctors. I'm referencing any doctor that's got a private practice and a God complex. Because people will try to find a good doctor, and it's getting to the point where people are referring doctors to their family members and their friends simply because that doctor doesn't treat them like a dick. and doesn't act like an asshole every time that he speaks to them, or she, I should say. And so ultimately, celebrity, entertainment, power can breed this terrible murkiness in what's actually supposed to be the focus. Doctors, much like lawyers, take oaths. They make promises. They promise under the Hippocratic Oath that they're going to try and help people. But then somebody from the pharmaceutical company comes along and says, hey, I've got this great drug. This great drug's been tested, and I'm not going to show you those tests. Don't worry about those tests. They're not important. But if you start prescribing this drug, then we're going to be able to pay for your family's vacation to Tahiti. And next thing you know, that doctor's pushing pills like he was a drug dealer on the corner, even though he's got a license. And so celebrity doctors can be very dangerous. Now, Ruthless mentioned a show called The Doctors, and ironically, there's actually, that's a weird show because it seems like a mixture of a few decent doctors and some terrible ones. Dr. Travis Stork seems to actually have his brain on correctly most of the time, and he generally tries to chime in when somebody says something really stupid to correct what a regular consumer would see. But the problem is that a person watches these shows, they're only an hour, half hour long, and they take that show, that everything they just got in that show, as their only medical advice, their only source of medical treatment, the only things they're going to do in their life. Dr. Oz is a prime example of that. He's a major celebrity, to the point that his daughter gets on television shows in the afternoon hours simply because she's his daughter. And ultimately, people would take his advice very seriously. And so when he starts pushing things and saying things will do things, saying that supplements will give you certain results that no sane medical professional would ever promise, just like no sane lawyer would ever promise a result of a case, then you end up with this dilemma because you have half the country watching these wackadoos on television and believing everything they're saying and then posting about it on Facebook and sharing it on Twitter and putting a picture on Instagram, and the other half of the people who are sane and willing to go find their own doctor and get actual medical advice from a good family physician. And people get caught up in the middle of that terrible clash of two worlds. Entertainment and medicine aren't things that should go together. One is meant to make you smile, laugh, cry, and in general distract from the real world, and the other one is meant to deal with issues that are very, very real, very, very painful, and very, very harsh. And the fact that somehow those two worlds have combined into who I call the king of the celebrity doctors, and that's the individual that I get pissed every time I think that he puts doctor in front of his name, good old Dr. Phil. I'll tell you what, when people start quoting Dr. Phil for their medical advice, help us all.
Well, when they start doing that, I want to smack them, but, that's illegal technically. Rain, did you have any initial point on this one before we get into my next bit of this particular topic?
Of course, I would normally just co-sign on everything, but I am going to go in a whole different direction. Yes, the doctors on TV, and I'm not talking about the show, The Doctors, I'm just saying doctors on TV in general, it's all a racket. And it's all entertainment, and it's all just for fun, at least as far as I'm concerned. What I take the most issue with is actually the ones who aren't on TV. I'm talking about the other ones who also took the Hippocratic Oath and said, we will first do no harm, and for some reason they forgot that actually meant to their patients as opposed to their bottom line. They forgot that they're supposed to be serving their patients and not serving the United States of pharmaceuticals. The FDA and all of those things and all of the testing and all that, all of that has been tainted for so long. I don't trust anyone with an MD anymore. If you call yourself a doctor, I have to instantly question how much of your soul have you already sold to Pfizer. So I'm just going to say that, I take issue with the entire practice of medicine now, because it's no longer exactly practicing medicine. Now it's practicing business. And considering you, Dr. Whoever, didn't go to business school, I would suggest that you stay out of it.
That's a fair point. I guess, to a degree, I've had a couple doctors in my life that I actually trust, and it's kind of that. All right, that saying people have about Congress that everyone thinks every politician except for their congressman is corrupt. I feel like we get like that about doctors. Everyone thinks every doctor but their doctor is on the hook to the pharmaceutical company, when the reality is, they all are. And obviously that serves a function. Obviously that has a point. But before I go on to some tirade about Dr. Phil that would take up surely an hour by itself and would include lots of screaming and calling him a bullshit quack more than once, allegedly. Let's kind of take that to the next logical conclusion. For all the benefit we get out of pharmaceuticals in this country, and I mean that purely from a medical necessity standpoint, antibiotics, things like my insulin. I'm diabetic. I take insulin. The medicines that are helpful in our society, the mumps, measles, rubella vaccines that idiot mothers are not giving their children because Jenny McCarthy's we're going to stop. For all of those things, for all of the benefits that we get out of pharmaceuticals, have we let pharmaceutical companies get too much of a hold in our everyday health? And we're going to go to Rain first and then go to the ref. Are we at a dangerous point? Or is it that we need to find a more harmonious balance between letting pharmaceutical companies make the money they need to create the drugs we need to keep people alive, and not giving them so much control over what people are being prescribed, and to keep from sort of over-medicating the population? And I'll sort of let you start there.
I'm going to ask a simple question that, of course, you can't necessarily answer. Or you can, but when was the last time the pharmaceutical companies actually came up with a cure for anything? Until we go back to a time where they're actually coming up for cures for things as opposed to maskers of symptoms, I refuse to trust any of them. You want to tell me that it's necessary for so many of these things, like, you know what, I have a thyroid issue, and my thyroid medication doesn't cure anything. It's not getting rid of the nodules in my thyroid. It's not doing anything. All it's doing is it's making it easier for me to live with what it is that I have. It's not curing anything. You want to give me a cure for something? I am all for it. But if all you're going to do is say, here, this will make it easier for you to live with this, that's not something that is really benefiting me. When you spend enough of your time in pain, all that actually does, when you just take the medication to get rid of the pain, it actually just makes it harder for your body to let you know when there's something wrong. And if you don't know this, pain is the body's way of letting you know that there's something wrong. If every time you get a headache or a backache or whatever ache, you pop some kind of random painkiller, guess what? You are masking the symptom of some kind of something that could be way more detrimental. And because all your doctor's going to do is prescribe some other pain medication that might be a little bit stronger and not actually give you the proper test that's going to tell you what you have and possibly give you an opportunity to cure that, all you're going to do is end up in a much worse situation later, so that you can then pay your doctor to do the job that they should have done in the first place, which is cure the damn problem. But they don't do that anymore.
Well, I mean, to semi-answer your question, the things that we usually cure are sudden epidemics. I believe technically we have a cure for the hantavirus. I believe we also have a cure for Ebola. But there's usually, it's not a, I get what you mean, it's not a, like, commonly occurring illnesses are not usually ones that have cures from the pharmaceutical companies, and it's a dubious question to begin with whether or not there is an ability to cure them, because technically speaking, if we have the ability to create treatments for various diseases and ailments, then we should have abilities to cure them. Like, for instance, the idea that we have psychotropics to handle psychological issues. So you've got drugs to handle schizophrenia, but there is no cure for it. Even though the drugs alter the brain's chemistry and the chemical makeup of the body to combat the mental illness, for some reason we can't take the next step in curing that mental illness. So I get what you're saying. But there's a question of, is it even possible to cure certain things? And I think that's possibly a advancement issue, and that's what we're going to kind of go into with the ref here. This idea that you began with, the idea that there aren't really a lot of cures for the things that ail us out there. There's a lot of coverage for the things that ail us out there. There's a lot of treatment, because the treatment is a more profitable thing, yes, but there also seems to be that there is very little curing going on. And is that just a function of cost, or could it possibly be that we've just gotten to that point where making the next leap in treating our health is so difficult and so much research must be done, because we're talking about, heart disease and cancer and AIDS and, we're talking about diseases that are complex and have recently become more pervasive in culture, because as opposed to diseases that are easily curable. Polio doesn't really have a problem other than, like I said, the stupid moms like Jenna McCarthy who think that vaccines cause autism. Measles, mumps, and rubella don't have a problem because we have vaccines for those things. Chickenpox and smallpox. These are things that are, generally covered. So is it that we've gotten to the point where the diseases we need to cure are just that much harder to cure? Or is it, like Rand seems to be espousing, that the cost of cure to the profit of the pharmaceutical company is too high at present to not just treat the illness, which can continually make them money? And we'll go right to the ref with this.
Gosh, this is an interesting topic for me. I'm the son of 2 registered nurses. There's several doctors, medical doctors in my family. I'd like to think that all of those individuals have a good ethical standard and moral code. But at the same time, Rain makes a very, 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 very valid point, and I would pose the question, in response to the idea of, have we kind of reached our limits and we've just gotten to the point of, can all we do is mask things? Can we no longer cure things? With the question, I don't know, has the human mind reached its limit? Because all those vaccines that you just listed, Ruthless, all those things, polio, chickenpox, measles, Ebola, these things, people slaved over the work of trying to find these cures. The individuals who cured these diseases in history, if people want to take an interest and read up some of the history about the polio vaccine, or read up some of the history about the curing of plague to an extent. The idea that those things can be cured, I think, has been lost, mostly because there isn't somebody out there that's willing to sit in a lab and suffer the hard work that it takes to do it. They would rather mask the symptom and then realize that they're getting a steady paycheck doing it. I hate the fact that we've done this, but full circle. The almighty dollar gets to control a lot of things, and a lot of this medical research is done where? Oh wait, that's right. Higher education universities, medical hospitals. Oh wait, that's right. They're only doing part of the work because they're not doing all of the work. So, I mean, sick, evil cycle of things, but ultimately, there isn't some guy sitting in some lab in some university's chemistry department poring over stacks and stacks and stacks of data and just trying to run test after test after test to see if they can combat an actual microbiotic virus, to see underneath a microscope if this thing that they're injecting into this virus hurts it or helps it. Because that takes so much time and effort, and why do that when they can easily just slightly tweak a formula that they've already got, get a new drug, and then make a bunch of money off of it? I don't know how many times I've sat in a doctor's office and I've seen a pharmaceuticals rep come into the office. And I've realized that that person is a legal drug dealer. That is exactly what that individual is. They are legally there to try and deal to the doctor the idea that their drugs that they're selling from their company are the best, that they hide things the best. Well, if somebody slaves over the idea of a cure, there are no more pharmaceutical reps. There is no more need for medicine after everybody's been cured. And so the ultimate bottom line gets affected. And so I think there's absolutely 100% no way around the idea that this business influence, this entertainment influence, if you will, has seeped into the medical industry. And so it's a terrible thing whenever somebody goes to a doctor and the doctor is what they in the medical field refer to as a holistic doctor, an individual who takes a holistic approach. They attempt to correct your problems by not just prescribing you things, but saying, hey, what are you eating? What's your activity level? You've got back problems. Okay, well, here's some exercises to help strengthen some of those muscles and change your lifestyle. When somebody gets that doctor and then they come down to the doctor's office and they go, that guy's a quack. I just needed some Vicodin. And it's just like Rain said, the Vicodin doesn't do anything except mask what actually the problem is. The problem is medical, the problem is physical, the problem is mental. And just like Ruthless said, not everything can be cured. I can speak to that very personally. I'm obviously, since both the other podcast members have divulged, I have several mental disorders that are not going to be things that are ever going to be curable, as far as I'm aware. But thanks to some of the pharmaceuticals that have been created, my balances in my brain are functional, and I can sit here and have these cognizant conversations instead of staring off into Wonderland, being completely a zombie to the drugs that I have to take. But with things like a disease such as, and I'm going to go ahead and call out the one that I think most people think of, and that's AIDS. The AIDS virus, the HIV has gotten to a point now where people live with that and live a long life with it without drastic effect on their life. I mean, obviously effect, but it is no longer the death sentence it was when it was first discovered. When it was first coming out that somebody had AIDS, somebody had HIV, it was pretty much assumed that person had about 10 to 20 years to live, maybe, if they were lucky, if they got the very, very best, most expensive medical treatment possible. And now, all of a sudden, those drugs, while extremely expensive, can prolong life. But here, then I sit here and I wonder, well, if they can prolong it that well and make it that comfortable, what's stopped anybody from figuring out how to beat the damn thing? And so, just like Rain was talking about, the idea of a cure seems to be so far out of reach, and I think it's in part because society's grasp of it is out of reach. We don't have people that are willing to, for pennies, for literally almost no compensation, sit in a lab in some higher education facility and test after test after test, try to find a way to beat something. And whether that's because that individuals have gotten a little lazy over time, whether that's because the human mind has reached its limit, or whether that's because the higher education facility isn't about to let you use their lab and all their really fancy equipment for free. The bottom line is that it seems that it is better for the medical professions when they don't have direct cures for things.
That's an interesting position to put things in. I want to get into something that you brought up, though. This idea of how we get to cures, and that's that's like I said, the perfect jumping off point to the next bit of this discussion. Okay, we all know that medical research is regulated far better than supplements and vitamins are in this country. Oddly enough, gee, I wonder if lobbying and money and politics has to do with that. Anyway, we know that medical research is regulated. That you cannot just go out and start saying, I'm gonna work on a cure for this disease. You actually have to have certain licensing. You have to have approval from certain government agencies. You actually have to prove that you're a legitimate researcher and things like that to get access to things you need. This is going to sound far more heartless than I intended, but are we better off in this time where we have to make these kinds of efforts to begin to do medical research, or were we better off when medical research could be done however you wanted to? I mean, we won't discuss in full, folks. You need to sometimes Google these ideas that we bring up, but we won't discuss in full the way we got penicillin and the cure for polio and the cure for some other diseases, but they definitely did not involve what anyone would call today ethical research. There's a lot of animal testing, yes, but there's a lot of human testing that occurs to get us to the place we are now. Are we safer and thus have to deal with the consequences of being safer in the terms of medical research? Or is it that we need to sort of allow for more radical notions of getting to cures? I don't mean the Wild West here. I don't mean to completely deregulate medical research. I'm not saying that you can snatch children off the streets like they have done at different points in history to test medical theories on them. What I mean is, should we allow for the kid who gets a biology degree and his collective of buddies to petition a university to do research on a particular disease or cure for a disease? Should we allow for private industry to fund medical research that allows for human trials without FDA approval? Should we allow for a much more robustly deregulated but not missing a much less regulated industry when it comes to medical research? And Rain wanted to say something, so let me go ahead and let her speak.
I'm going to go back on something and then come back to what it is that we're actually talking about now. I have to correct one thing, because I actually did, once upon a time, work at a university for the sciences, where those kids at that time, and I still talk to some of them, were actually in a position to do those things. It isn't a question of whether or not anybody is willing to do the hard work. That is so not the case. The case is more on the side of, will these people allow it to go through? And, I mean, if we take it to, I mean, completely off topic, but just as an example, the way how technology was once handled in terms of, you know, how the Apples and IBMs of the world protected themselves from the innovative thinkers by either buying them out or killing them off, either literally or figuratively. That is the problem. It's not necessarily a question of whether these kids who actually haven't been completely tainted by the world yet, they want to make a difference. They want to do things like be the one who actually cures cancer. They want to be the one who actually cures Alzheimer's. They want to be the one who can do something to save their great-grandmother, and I'm telling a real story, from whatever disease it is that she is suffering from. They want to be that person. They have that drive. They have that willingness. So that's not the problem. It's not a question of whether these students actually want to actually go for the cure and take the time and spend the hours poring over data and doing hours upon hours of tests, because that's what they're doing day in, day out already. Some of them in there until after 10 o'clock at night, when they've already been in school since 6 o'clock that morning, taking other unrelated classes just so that they can get to the part of the research that they are trying to get to. So I just wanted to say that in defense of the students, because that matters. And that then takes us to the next question, which is, are we better off? To that I bring up the very serious issue of, like, the Tuskegee trials. People, specifically black men, being tested on just by virtue of being black, or the Holocaust, or, you know, the things that Hitler sanctioned to be done to Jews in those, a lot of the things that we enjoy now in terms of medicine and science was tested on people against their will in very cruel and unusual ways first. So, no, I'm not going to say that we're necessarily better off. But at the same time, we do need to do something to actually have things get done. And I'm not necessarily saying that the something that we need to do should involve random human trials that more often than not kill people long before they actually get to do any good. But we should definitely be doing things and allowing people to do things, basically do the hard work that the rest of us can't do, or make the hard decisions that the rest of us can't make, in order to make things better and easier for all of us.
Well, that's certainly a question point. I don't think anyone's saying we should allow for human trials against their will. The Tuskegee experiment is something I was actually about to bring up, because that is sort of the anti-argument to allowing for a less regulated medical research industry. I have this is one of the few times you're actually going to hear me talk about my own internal conflict on the issue. One of the things that I tend to pride myself on is this no-nonsense approach to things, that I can be ruthless about any subject, even if it's one that affects me. And to a degree, I have to ask myself, what is the value of a cure gotten in a horrifying fashion? this subject in particular brings it up. And before we transition into the next thing, I'm not going to let you, the listeners, escape without having to seriously question the way you exist now. So I'm going to subject my two, co-pilots on this mission and to this particularly dark question. When I say how much is a person's life worth, I mean towards a cure. We are in a position where, as a society, we could potentially, cure a lot of diseases with more open ability to do human trials. That we could move faster on a lot of things if we didn't have governments in the way of getting to them. And we'll get to the government involvement in medical decisions in a second. But is it worth to you the life of someone who you may not or may know if we could cure every kind of cancer tomorrow? Is it worth it to you? And, audience, I want you to think about this. I'll get the actual reactions from Rain and the Radical Ref in a second. But is it worth it to you to kill someone who you will never meet in a place that you will never visit if the day after they die, no one would ever die of AIDS again? Is it worth it to you to make the human body unable to be ravaged by any disease, serial killer, but time, if a single person has to die? That's the hardest one. But I know some people that listen to us are accustomed to me asking hard questions and breezed through that one and said, yeah, it's worth it to me. One person's enough. Okay, fine. What about 100 people? See, now we're getting into actual research groups. We're talking about how much it takes to take a human trial into approved use. If 100 people, 100 Americans, who you might have some tangential connection to, but most of which you will never see, names you will never hear, die in places you may or may not have visited, but would never remember. Is it worth it to you for that 100 people to die, for the 100 people's families to deal with their death, to cure cancer tomorrow, to cure heart disease tomorrow, to cure schizophrenia tomorrow, to cure to cure diabetes, to cure every major disease that has become a major killer among us? Now, I know there's truly hardened folk out there listening right now. I know there are folks who are listening to me saying this like, yeah, 100 people? That's not a lot of people. Fine, I'll deal with it. Alright. I can understand how some of you can feel that way and can handle that. And you don't have a problem pressing the metaphorical red button here. So I'm going to take you even further. If 1,000 children had to die to cure every child from their forward of autism, if 1,000 children had to die today to cure every childhood disease on the planet, so that those 1,000 kids die so every other child could live. That means no more Tay-Sachs disease. That means, no more sudden infant death syndrome. That means literally nothing kills kids but physical accidents that they get into. No genetic diseases kill children. No airborne illnesses kill children. If you had to kill 1,000 to make that happen, could you say okay? Could you say that that's something you could handle? Now, I am the Ruthless Wonder, not a Ruthless Wonder. And those questions give me more pause than my own mortality. And it's because I'm not a monster mostly, but it's also because how do I say yes or no? How do you say yes or no? Because if you were really quick to say, no, I could never do it, what about all those kids that die from these diseases every year? What about all those children, in the case of autism, that are held back in their psychological development to a degree that they require far more care than the average child? What about the family crying over their loved one who just died from heart disease, who just died from AIDS? What about the family going broke and being kicked out of their home because one of the family has a cancer that they finally got into remission but was so expensive that they just couldn't keep up? Can you look either group in the face and say, no, you don't deserve to live, or no, I won't save you because I want to save all of them? It is the darkest question we have ever brought up on this podcast, and I apologize that we have to go this far. So when we come out of this, I'll be back into my much more raged position. But we're talking about medicine. We're talking about the sacrifices necessary to save humanity, as it were. And to my two guests, I'm going to ask you guys first to Ralph, then to Rain. Can you handle what might be necessary to cure these things that we are all afraid of? There is no one alive who is not afraid of the prospect of a loved one or their child getting cancer. There's not a person alive who is not afraid of the prospect of losing a loved one to a mental illness that has no medication for it. There is not a person alive who isn't afraid of what would happen to them and their relationship with the person they love if they contracted AIDS, in whatever fashion. So I ask you the toughest question that I could possibly ask you during this podcast. I ask you the toughest question I've asked anyone in our podcast, much less on our website. Are you willing to do the darkest thing to save the rest of the world? And we'll start with the ref.
Oh, gee, thanks. Man. The whole time I knew it was coming to me, and the whole time I've been sitting here and I've been thinking, and I keep hearkening back to a graphic novel that I cherish very deeply. Some of our listeners may be very familiar with it. It is called The Watchmen. And in that graphic novel, it is full of what are typically known as anti-heroes, people who do things the dark way in order to, quote-unquote, help people. The villain of this graphic novel, and shame on any of you if you've never read it, I don't care, I will spoil the hell out of it. The villain of this graphic novel basically makes a decision, seeing the world is headed for nuclear war and sure complete destruction, to kill off millions of people in order to create a single point of focus for the rest of the world to unite against, thereby keeping the world at peace. This doesn't work quite the same way because, obviously the argument could be made that, people will eventually start fighting again. But the idea of, the kill one to save 100, the kill 100 to save 1,000,000, the kill 1,000,000 to save 1,000,000,000, is one of the great philosophical questions, I think, of the modern era. And I think leaders around the world struggle with that thought process anytime that they're contemplating any sort of drastic move. I don't know what exactly my answer would be to the question. I know what my personal reaction would be, and that is if somebody came up to me today and said, you die right now, everybody that has ever had cancer lives, and we cure it all, I throw myself on the sword in a heartbeat. I was raised with an understanding and a belief that sacrificing for something is the greatest thing you can possibly do. It's the most honorable thing you can do. It's the most rewarding thing that you can do, because it means that you've given yourself up for something else, for a greater good, so to speak. But man, when you start spreading that phrase, the greater good, around, it gets dangerous real fast. The idea of, going from people volunteering their lives to saying, no, it has to be this one, and this one, and those three people didn't volunteer. But they still have to die if this is going to work. And then you start having to mull over the idea of who are we to decide. I think that is part of what's held medicine back, the regulations on testing. As Rain mentioned, obviously correcting me, that there are people out there willing to do the hard part, but there are plenty of restrictions to their work as to how far they can go. The animal rights activists that prevent people from even testing on animals, whether anybody is okay with testing on animals or thinks it's extremely cruel. The idea of the question, are you willing to, quote unquote, push the metaphorical red button in order to save endless numbers more, is such a deep question. It makes me think of the other philosophical side point of a very nerdy television show known as Battlestar Galactica, where a character in the show posed the question to an audience: is humanity worth saving? Is humanity worth saving? Obviously, I would like to think yes. I would like to think there's something good in humans that is very worthy of being saved, but how far am I willing to personally take that? Beyond saying my own personal life, I can't say, I don't know if I have an answer to that question of what's right or wrong, because as you said, Ruthless, I mean, how do you say no to either group? How do you balance that issue in a moral, ethical sense? There are people, I'm sure, listening who were ready to kill off as many as it took in order to prevent future problems. There were people that probably, said stop at one. We won't even kill one person. It is a conundrum, and it is that kind of a conundrum that has caused many of these regulations and these licensing procedures and put a halt to many of those young students Rain mentioned that are working so hard, put a halt to their work because they can only go so far, and then once they get to a certain point, because they can't test it, because they don't have enough proof that it can be tested safely, the work stops. And they either have to find a new route to explore, or they have to find a new thing to focus on. And maybe if we let them go, just that, let that leash out a little bit further, then maybe they find something. But the problem, I think, the biggest problem that we run into here is in the fields of science, there are no guarantees. There are only hypotheses and proofs, and the ideals oftentimes do not necessarily yield what's expected. In fact, many of the greatest, quote-unquote, medical marvels and miracles of our time oftentimes come sort of out of accident, from somebody looking in a completely different direction for a completely different thing. The idea of for the greater good, which is really what we're talking about, the kill one to save thousands, the kill 1,000 to save millions, is such a difficult prospect to comprehend, especially because, we're not there. We're not in that position. But I do think...
I'm going to let you off the hook like this, though. Because
I mean,
you said you would fall on the sword.
I would, yes. I would. I can control myself.
But that's not the hard question.
I agree.
The hard question is, would you let someone you love fall on the sword?
I would. Because the people that have raised me, I believe, feel the same way. I was just recently married at the end of this month. If my wife looked at me and said that somebody told her that cancer could be cured tomorrow, but she had to die, I would urge her to strongly think about that situation, because the fact is that far more are saved, and only one is lost. But I think the big key there is, for me, I think the big key is the willingness of an individual. Many of the things we mentioned earlier, and things like the Holocaust and the Tuskegee trials, that people were forced against their will to be the test subjects, and that is wrong beyond measure. But at the same time, is it wrong beyond measure if you're told, hey, if you die for this, then everything will be cured? Is it wrong to say, well, I don't want to die? I think if you knew for a fact, for 100% certainty, that the cure would be made, that everything would be gone, then I would probably question anybody who wouldn't be willing to volunteer for that, just on a general personal basis. But by the same token, I can't ever judge a human who values their mortality. It is a fleeting thing that we have called life. We are but a speck in this grandiose universe that we live in, and we just happen to have brains and abilities to communicate and abilities to think. And so we are special creatures within that universe, at least as far as we know. And life is a special thing, not to be taken lightly. But for me, if somebody told me my entire family had to be wiped off the map, but that sudden infant death syndrome would never occur again, or autism would never occur again, I would be willing to make that jump. I personally would be willing to make that jump, because I believe that that's oftentimes what that kind of advancement needs, is not just the willingness of those young individuals that we talked about who are in there doing the hard work, but the sacrifice and the bravery of individuals to go ahead and say, you know what, I know what the result's going to be, but I'm prepared for that, because I also know that the outcome is far more important. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that society as a whole thinks that way. I don't know if we look out for each other in that way enough to where I think there's a lot of people that would say, no, you know what, let stupid people die, remove the warning labels from a bleach bottle. I think there are unfortunately people in this world that, to quote another nerdy thing, just want to watch the world burn. And it's hard to say with certainty any one way or the other.
Right. I'm gonna
go ahead.
I do want to do one quick thing. Yeah, I do disagree with the not letting the idiots die portion. So that's only because I have a war against idiocy and folks for idiot hunting season contest. But Rand, I wanted to go ahead and get your I want to know what you think. Could you do it? One, and two, any other thoughts do you have on the subject?
I'm going to give some background on this before I answer the question because, yeah, I got to give some background. I am one of those hero-loving geeks. I have a reverence for heroes, the ones who sacrifice for doing, just to do the right thing. I am one of those people who's extremely passionate about children, and, you know, I think that the only reason human beings live as long as we do is because we're supposed to protect children, and because it takes so long for our young to come to maturity in such a way that they can defend themselves. That's the only reason, as far as I'm concerned, that we live as long as we do. I also believe in doing the right thing first and thinking about the consequences of doing the right things after, or not at all, because that really doesn't do much of anything in the long run. That said, I would push the button. And the actual problem with pushing the button that I would have would be deciding who. That's the only question that I would have, because more often than not, it usually but people usually choose people based on trivial things like race or creed or sexual orientation or gender, or, you know, some perceived weakness that makes their one life worth less than another. I, of course, would take issue with it having to be children, but I would have a bigger issue with deciding which children had to go. I don't like that, or rather, I wouldn't like that something like that would have to happen, but at the same time, we do things like war. We do things like not sending aid for children. We do things like cockfighting and bullfighting and all kinds of things, dogfighting, that are completely against anything good or humane all the time, every day, with absolutely no promise of anything good coming out of it. So who am I to say that having a guarantee of something good actually coming out of it, and I'd still say no? I couldn't do that. I have heard of and seen and watched people on TV at least die before my very eyes for something as silly as the wrong color of bandana. I've heard of people killing each other and doing things to each other just because they can. And if we are, as a society, can be okay with those things, if we can look at those things and say, well, that's just human nature to fight and things like that, well, then it should also be human nature to save each other. And if we can't make the sacrifice or push the proverbial red button when there's actually a guarantee of something good coming out of it, but we have no problem sending young men and women out to war when there's definitely a guarantee of nothing good coming out of it but loss of other lives, whether it's on our side or not, we have no problem making that decision, but we take issue with being able to make a decision about something that will actually result in some good. I couldn't say no. I couldn't say no to the hundreds of families that are suffering right now, and I couldn't say no to the hundreds of families that are suffering in the future. I can definitely say I'm sorry to the families of people who would be chosen or who chose to make that sacrifice, and at least if I was the one pushing the button, then the objective would be these people are making this sacrifice, and their families and their loved ones would be compensated, or not necessarily compensated because you can't really compensate for someone's life, but they would definitely be treated a considerable amount better by making that sacrifice of their own loved one or having to survive their loved one who made that sacrifice. So, yeah, I'd push the button. and I'd feel horrible about it. But I'd feel the same kind of horrible about pushing the button that I do when I watch people go to war and when I watch people die because of the death penalty and when I watch innocent people on the street being victimized. I feel that same kind of bad, but at least I could go to sleep at night knowing that I did something right at the end of the day.
There you have it, folks. Now, I could go in a long bit about my actual choice in each position. I could explain my answer in 1,000 different ways, but I'm not going to. Chris, excuse me, the ref brought us a very powerful alternative question. Could you let yourself fall on the sword? And he answered my question without a moment's hesitation of could he allow someone he loved to fall on the sword for that to happen. It's just as easy for me to say myself, and it's just as easy for me to say someone I love. Because I know that it would be painful for me to lose that person, but they would feel the same way that I feel. That it saves so many lives that it would be selfish to say no. And it doesn't get tough for me. It gives me pause. I don't make such a decision easy. But it doesn't get extremely difficult for me. Here's what I mean. You tell me 1,000 adults have to die. I don't get to know who they are. They come from everywhere. I may or may not know them. I may or may not have met them. They could be anyone. But these 1,000 random people save the lives of all 7 billion people currently living and every person born from that moment forward. It's selfish to say no. You tell me 1,000 children, 1,000 different little potentials have to die to save every child from that day forward. Even if you told me I have to meet every kid beforehand, I will do it crying my eyes out, sobbing as I think about their faces, and the nightmares would haunt me for the rest of my existence of what I'd done. But to save every child going forward, I have to do it. But these are not decisions that are easy decisions. These are not questions I answer without having long thought about them. And believe me, that's not something that I come across an answer easily for. But it's something that I know I would endure the worst part of the survival's guilt of. See, the reason I called the ref's, position of falling on the sword himself easy is that it's easy to say, I'll give my life for everybody else. Because that's a personal sacrifice. You start weighing how it would affect the people around you. You think they can understand what I'm doing it for and why it's happening. It's a difficult thing to say, you don't get to know these people. It could be anyone. You could love them, you could hate them. They could be someone's mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, whatever. You just have to let it happen. But all of humanity will be saved for their sacrifice. Which is more important? This uniquely human experience and its evolution into something greater than we are currently, or the life of one person? Like I said, that's the darkest question we've ever asked. It's the darkest discussion we've ever had on this podcast, much less in the history of Words Don't Do It Justice, and every single radio show and blog and just general conversation I've ever had. It's the darkest discussion we could have, but I wasn't going to shy away from it while we were talking about health and what's necessary for certain things to happen. So we're going to transition out of it, and we're going to talk briefly, because we don't have a lot of time left. We have to make our big announcement, but we're going to talk briefly about the real thing that can stop medical research, the real thing that can stop college costs from being more not just palatable, but survivable by students and their families. The real thing that keeps regulation from unregulated industries. I want to talk to you briefly today, and I'm going to bring in our two guests after I get done with this initial bit. I'm going to talk to you briefly today about money in politics. Now, as a political science major at undergrad, one of the things I studied was the nature of lobbying and how it's affected certain policies. Specifically, it was about education policy, which you might notice is why I brought up this education topic to transition into this. And the problem that we have in this country is that we allow for unfettered access to politicians to be affected by seemingly limitless strands of money. I don't care what your position is politically. I have personally gotten myself to the point where if we're going to call me an American political figure, I'm an independent. Absolutely independent in the fact that I actually believe that as moderate extremism is bad on both ends. I like to joke from time to time about being a enlightened Democlesian imperialist. It's a joke. It's just a thing I say sometimes. The reality is, I believe that this idea of democracy is a good thing. But I also believe that we have a cancer within it. I believe we have a virus infecting it, keeping it from being what it should be. And that is the influence of money on the power of government. Here's what I mean. Do you know the reason why supplements and vitamins are not a well-regulated industry? It's because every time that we have tried to regulate these industries to root out the snake oil salesmen that have crept into them over the years, we have had senators who receive the highest campaign contributions and other lobbyist contact on the issue to propose bills which keep regulation from happening. Because we have allowed these corporations that make money. Look, I like 5 Hour Energy like the next guy, but there's some things about it that are not true, and they made them take it off the label for a reason. We allow these things on the market. We allow people to be trod over by the money of the companies that make these products that are supposedly for us, and wonder why we're still sick. If we want to get down to the root of the problem, if we want to get down to the root of why it is not profitable for a university to allow students to do medical trials on drugs that could save your life, if we want to get down to the reason why it is more profitable for the federal government to allow private lenders to soak every dollar out of your wallets and bank accounts to send your kid to school, if we want to get down to the problem of why, we have to decide whether or not it's in our interest to help out other nations with aid. Nations with people dying from genocide or famine. If we want to get down to that, it's the decision of why are we allowing lobbyists to affect policy. Now, I'm going to go into each of our co-pilots here, our co-hosts here. But I'm going to start with this idea of did you know? I'm going to give you a knowing is half the battle moment. Did you know that it is not illegal for a member of government, be they staff in a congressperson's office, be they an ex-president, be they the wife of an ex-president, be they a former senator or congressperson, it is not illegal for them to leave Congress after being lobbied by an industry or a specific company and then go work for that industry or specific company. It is also not illegal to take someone who has worked as a lobbyist for an industry and make them the head of the regulatory body for that industry. We have this notion of the, it's not even a meme, it's a classic quip that the inmates are running the asylum. The inmates are running the asylum. So, because we went to the ref first here, we're going to go to Rain first. I want to know your honest thoughts about the, and we'll give you 4 minutes here. I want to know your honest thoughts about the influence of money in politics, and then after your 4 minutes, I'll go ahead and give the Radical Ref his 4 minutes, and then we'll do a wrap up before our announcement. But go ahead, Rain. Give me your thoughts.
Well, shameless plug, I actually did a blog on this, sort of, at least, where I was basically talking about how the reality of things really just bites. Because I like to think that these people, they go in there with good ideals and morals and values, and then they come out and somehow everything gets all twisted and disgusting and ugly. And again, it goes back to the almighty dollar. So how do I feel? What is my honest opinion about politics and money? I think it does nothing to serve the government that's supposed to be for the people, by the people. It is no longer for the people, by the people. It is now for the corporate and by the corporate, because they are the ones who are bankrolling the ads. They're the ones who are bankrolling the political campaigns. They're the ones who get to make all the decisions in the backs of our politicians' minds. And I'm not speaking specifically about any one or other side. Yeah, I might be a Democrat, but I recognize that people are people, and whatever it is that they choose to call themselves on any given day, it really tends to not matter quite as much when there's a sizable contribution in question. So when it comes to politics and policy and profits, it's murky water that we need to clean up. We need to get a filter in there and start fixing it, because the fact that we can't trust the people who we vote for to do what's right necessarily, it's concerning. And now that I've said that, I also have to back up and also say, of course, when the question is, will doing this for this corporate whatever the hell anger my voters so much that they won't vote for me again, that matters too. So yes, policy, politics, and profits is a terrible, terrible thing, but at the same time, we have the opportunity to also do things like vote and make sure that they understand that when we vote, our voices do matter, and the only way you're going to be able to have your voice matter to these corporate people who are giving you these kickbacks, who are giving you these perks, is if you're still in office, because they won't be courting you if you're not in office anymore, is to make sure that we continue voting. Once we stop voting, we give the corporations complete control over everything. So we have to vote, because otherwise, the inmates might be running the prison, but at least we might just so happen to get a few good correction officers in there too. And I guess it's 12 of one and a dozen of the other, but these things, they matter. And if we ignore any facet of it, we do ourselves a disservice. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
All right, the Radical Ref. Like I said, I'm not going to give you time to give your personal opinion on the matter. Go for it.
You know, it's interesting because I find myself in the seat of these politicians. I went into law with the greatest ideals and intentions that I would help people. My passion was to stop crimes against women and children, and to really root out those terribly evil people that will just hurt individuals for no reason whatsoever. And here I find myself now a licensed attorney for a year, and it's nothing at all like what I wanted it to be, and I can't even find myself a proper job in that public service environment. And that's the key phrase: public service. A person who is an elected official, or a person who is serving in a prosecutor's office, or a person who has put on a police uniform, is supposed to be a public servant. The highest level of public servant is the President of the United States. Congressmen, senators, representatives, all of them are supposed to be public servants. Now, public servants, like police officers, do not have the same paycheck as those that are senators or House of Representatives or the president or whoever. And the money does change the people. We've heard the phrase before: money changes people, and it's a truth. It's a fact. Are there people that can get a lot of money and not change? Yeah, maybe there's a few, but for the vast majority, any person that comes into a large sum of money or has the access to get large sums of money changes. Part of the reason that the large sums of money are required in higher level offices of politics is because it costs that much just to run the campaign to get the office, as opposed to long ago when the person would simply go door to door in their district because that was capable, because there were only a few towns and they could just travel and introduce themselves and speak on their own behalf about what they believed. And this is how, many of our basic laws and our basic lawmakers found opportunities. Unfortunately, there was still plenty of injustice and inequality in the fact that only certain people of certain colors and certain ages and certain religions could do these things. Ultimately, the almighty dollar has really crashed in on so many things. So, I hope that I hope that the idea of being a public servant can eventually creep its way back into these minds and hearts. That's what I got.
Well, there you have it, folks. But I don't want to leave you on a point in despair, folks. I want to leave you on some happy news before we give our big announcement. You can do something about this. And I'll tell you how. Recently in Vermont and California, a group has helped lead the way to get a constitutional convention put together for the purposes of voting on an amendment that would remove money from politics. And I think it's such a great idea that I have volunteered to help them out in my state of Missouri with whatever they need. You can find more about them at wolf-pac.org. wolf-pac.com. Wolf-pac.com. PAC. The political action committee that has one goal: to literally take money out of politics, so that whether you believe ultra conservatively, whether you believe ultra liberally, whether you're a moderate in the middle, whatever your political ideology is, it is the reason why people are elected and why bills are passed, and not how much money can grease the pockets of your politicians. wolf-pac.com. And if you're in Missouri, I hope to see you over there. Now, I've given you a solution, which is an odd thing for me to do. And now I want to give you a big announcement as we head on our way out of this podcast. We've had quite a long podcast, but we're happy to give you a little bit more for your value than even usual. So I want to go ahead and let you know about our big announcement. And that, of course, is that the Words Don't Do It Justice podcast is now officially going to be part of the WDDIJcast Radio Network. I want to thank all of our good friends over there. Rainpool's double duty working for us and for them, so I'm sure she's happy to have us under one umbrella for a little while here. But starting next month, our podcast will be available through all of their radio network sites. All of our podcasts will, of course, still be linked to from our website, so you'll be able to get to where the podcasts are hosted from wordsdon'tdoitjustice.com or wordsdon'tdoitjustice.net now. But we are now the new political podcast over at WDDIJcast Radio Network. So we hope you go check out some more of their shows. Rain appears, of course, on a few of their shows. So obviously we tune in for those. But guys, it's a big announcement. We've teamed up with our favorite podcast network for making this podcast even bigger than it has been. So I'm going to get on out of here and look forward to a new Wrath of Ruthless next month as well. But for Ray and the Radical Ref, I am the Ruthless Wonder, not a Ruthless Wonder. And you've been listening to Words Don't Do It Justice. Bye-bye.